All right, thank you for joining us tonight. We're here. I'm Don Ford.
And I'm Tina-Desiree Berg.
And we are here with our second show. Hope you caught our inaugural broadcast. And then we didn't have our name figured out. But we have something now, don't we, Tina?
Progressive Insider.
You got it. That's what we're going with. We may regret that later, but it's happening right now. There's a lot of fun things. We'll play with that later. Tonight, we have Kerri Barber with us. And Kerri Barber, not only was she a Bernie-endorsed candidate in 2016, she has led the fight against a serious brick wall of corruption going on in Illinois. Last time, we had Curtis Wild on, and Curtis has an amazing story, which you should listen to, but the short version is he was able to get elected DNC with very little effort because the rules basically allowed it, but not every story is a winning story when it comes to doing that. I'm not going to sit here and badmouth everything that's happening inside the DNC, though.
I am.
Yeah, Tina, that's our good cop, bad cop routine, so...
I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about, Don. I am... Well, sometimes it matters also whether they're prepared or not. Oftentimes, after 2016, you had centrists and corporate Democrats that weren't defending their positions because they didn't see the progressives coming in. And so we saw slates here in even California where the delegates the Bernie-crats swept the slate. But this last election cycle this past year, we saw those folks fighting back, and we did lose some elections because they were better organized, engaging in more corruption.
I actually wrote about this in the last article. Yeah. I had gotten a tip that the telecoms wanted to come into California on this specific issue. And we'll get into this another time, but they were interested in reversing the rules on net neutrality here in California.
Of course.
So they were going to put a bunch of money into ADEM elections, and we don't know how real that is.
I'm guessing that it's real because, just as a friendly reminder, I was actually hit at one of the ADEM elections covering it as a journalist. And the reason is I exposed some corruption was going on. To make the long story short, if you haven't seen the articles that I wrote or the video, it ended up having so much corruption, the KDM party had to overturn the election and redo the election.
Oh,
so they had a second.
They
had a second election.
That was you. I didn't realize that was you.
Me.
Of course it was you. So Kerri here, though, is kind of like, imagine that, but a whole state, which in LA County is not the hardest thing to do, but we do divide it up.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people here doing all kinds of things. Now, Kerri is dealing with a state that it's easily, in the way that New York had the stiffest and harshest registration rules that we put a lot of pressure on as progressives to get changed, which it did, and we're very happy about. Even though 30 days is still too long, but better than what it was. Kerri is dealing with some of the stiffest and harshest rules that have to do with elections in the state party chair race.
Yeah, Illinois, not only that, but Illinois is well known for its corruption. Let's be honest.
Well, Kerri here is here to tell us a little bit about that, and luckily she has a beautiful voice to make a very depressing subject more appetizing. So, Kerri, how are you doing tonight?
Hey, I'm doing really well, thank you.
Okay, thank you for being here.
Indeed.
So we're going to get back, and of course we want to hear from Kerri, because she is a party leader in her state. She's a progressive party leader as well. Not only, I think I got a little off track, I actually stayed with her. I mean, Kerri, do you want to tell them how we actually met?
Sure. So in my spare time between watching C-SPAN, I was watching the rules and bylaws in the Unity Commission while I was doing my regular paid gig. And there was this, I didn't even know who he was, but he was saying some crazy things. And I had to jump in and go, wait a second. And it turned out he was right. And I was like, okay, whoever this person is pretty clever. And what he's saying, I was watching it in real time have an effect on some of these delegates, and it turned out to be Don Ford. So this is how we met because, general comments come in, people love it, they hate it, whatever, but the things that he was talking about really caught my attention, the cream rises. So it was interesting to witness that in real time with the rules and bylaws because I was covering it to write a story on what was happening and how it came out. So it was interesting to see kind of how the sausage gets made right there. So yeah, that's how Don and I met.
So Kerri, talk a little bit about that. I attended the Unity Reform Commission hearing in Las Vegas at Bally's, and you were the one there local in your state. What were some of the egregious things that you saw happen?
During the 2016 election?
Yes.
Okay. So I was a candidate. So before the primary, I will admit I was a little naive. I was totally gung-ho. And the region where I live is a very, very red district. So everyone thinks Illinois is blue. It's not. Chicago is sort of blue. Once you get into the collar counties, it's deep red territory. So I was dealing with a different kind of issue. You know, when you run as a Democrat in some of these areas, you do get threats and things like that. So what we noticed was we were recruiting a bunch of new precinct committee people for the party. People were suddenly very engaged. And then you had, you know, this upstart from Vermont who was running, and it inspired a bunch of people. So we were busy getting people engaged and having so many new voters step up and talk to us while we were canvassing and things like that. But I will say immediately after the primary, I still had to run my race. That's when we started getting doors slammed in our face and the temperature completely changed. So like in my area, it was one of those pivot counties, and there are pivot districts all over the country, big, big swaths of Republican areas that had voted for Bernie. So like my county went for Obama the first time and then went for, you know, Trump and everyone else, but voted for Bernie at a rate of 62%. And that was, I think we need to remember that Republicans left their contested primary to cross over, many for the first time, to vote for Bernie Sanders. And that was happening everywhere. So after that primary, even within our own party, it was a major upheaval because we could see what was happening and how things were being done. And then as a candidate, you know, I'm out canvassing with people who are running for Congress, and we're still trying to flip Congress. And we're being told by our county and state party leaders that there's no money for us because now it's all being funneled to the Hillary Victory Fund.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a real problem.
That's pretty egregious.
Yeah, that was right. That essentially answers your question. And trust me, I know Kerri's story. This is the tip, not even the tip of the iceberg. Yeah, it's really bad. So something I want to point out, and what we just talked about, is I tell a story about the governor's race in 2018 in Florida being thrown over control of the state party's chaired race.
Gillum?
Yeah, Gillum. And it gets a little complicated because the rules in Florida are a little complicated, and we'll get into this another time. But this is another really good example of where they will control and throw elections to all control the state party chair race. Now, a lot of people will say, oh, well, you know, it's just inter-party. It's not that big a deal. But there are these crucial flip counties and districts that are basically how Democrats win. There are these rural places where Obama went and promised people change, where the hardest hit farming communities really are. And we kind of forget about them, especially in like New York or Boston or any of the major cities. And so we kind of forget how important they are.
You know, maybe some do. I don't. But here's the thing that's important about what you're saying and what Kerri just said. A good chunk of Obama voters did turn around and vote for Trump. And unless we do something to fix the reasons why, we're going to see this happen again and again and again. Neoliberalism has failed the vast majority because they have seen a decrease in their paycheck and they've seen an increase in their living expenses. These things are tied together, and Trump is just a symptom of the bigger problem.
Everyone thinks of neoliberalism as a democratic thing now that after generations of it being adopted as a democratic policy, but this isn't. This is a Republican policy. This is an economic policy of austerity, and that has spread over into the Democratic Party. And this is where the conversation goes. Are they really Republicans or are they really Democrats? And who are they trying to win?
They're neither. The neoists, so this is why I use the term neoist, because neoconservatives and neoliberals basically buy into the same philosophy. And this came out of the 1940s. You can go back. It's a Hayek, the philosopher is Hayek, if you really want to get deep in the roots on there. But the things that they ascribe to are the privatization of government, big swaths of it. They are corporatists through and through. And the most egregious thing that they believe is that the free market, and quote unquote free market, because there's no such thing as a free market, let's be clear, but that the free market is the moral arbiter of all of these things, which is just some serious bullshit, if I might use that word.
If you want a clearer version of what she just said for everyone out there.
That's not a philosopher.
Is that the big thing is, I think, the school to prison pipeline.
Yeah.
And we interviewed the...
That's a great example of it, yeah.
This is the clearest, I think, version
Yeah.
that people will feel in their everyday. And it was when we were interviewing the assemblyman at the Venice event about criminal justice. And
Reggie Jones-Sawyer?
That's right. And
Reggie Jones.
if you haven't caught that interview, please, you really should check it out. But he talks about how they can tell how many prison beds they need based off of third grade reading results.
Yeah, exactly. Third grade reading results, which is kind of scary.
Which is austerity practices.
100%.
It really, in its finest, neoliberalism in America is at its finest, because those are really like a European versus American terminology nowadays.
Yeah, and I'd say the other prong of that also is the privatization of prisons sort of incentivized putting folks into prison. And then it's not just they collect fees to keep people housed from the states or the federal government if they're a private prison entity, but it's also that they're collecting money from corporations that use the prison labor for whatever.
Which is slave labor. I mean, they're getting paid less than
voluntary servitude under the 13th Amendment. And I think a great example of that recently is Michael Bloomberg got into trouble for using prison labor to make campaign phone calls, which is unbelievable. It's so gross.
I kind of want to give some benefit of the doubt that this was like outsourced to an outsource at just the lowest dollar margin, and maybe
you're more charitable than me. I'm giving zero benefit of the doubt.
All right.
This is absolutely unacceptable.
Yeah, no, it is unacceptable. It is, and I think
disqualifying.
Yeah, well, not that we needed another reason to disqualify. I wasn't sure he was qualified to be disqualified.
Fair.
Because now all he has to do is prove he's not disqualified. No, now he's qualified. Whoa, buddy.
What do you think of that, Kerri?
Well, I think we tend to be the worst case scenario here in Illinois, and I feel like we're the litmus test for the rest of the country. If it'll fly here, it can be rebranded and packaged. So, for example, I talked about how we had people running for Congress, good people running, and all of their money was wiped out. So some of those same people decided to step up and run again. So they were rising candidates in 2017 and 18. And this is where it really became an issue for me. So we are all now familiar with the DCCC Blacklist policy. Well, what people may not recognize is the new chair of the DCCC, Sherry Bustos. She's one of our congressional reps here in Illinois, just south of me. So whenever something happens, and this is both on the right and the left, we have, Americans for Prosperity out here who will test the waters. So most people are now familiar with the Janus case and unions. That was about 15 minutes to the east of me is where that happened. So in our case with the DCCC, my business partner and I at the time owned a small woman-owned business, and I am disabled. I'm blind. But what we did was we were still active after the last cycle, and we formed an Our Revolution group, and we were volunteering our time and talents for progressive candidates. So we had a small marketing and communications firm. So our business was the first one targeted. And what they did to us was they started with a whisper campaign, and they targeted my husband, who was a district chair. So what proceeded from that was they illegally had him removed from office by removing 20 of the PCs that he had recruited and rigging a vote.
So real fast, just so everyone knows, how inter-party elections are a little different in every state. In Illinois, some of your rights are state protected, and that's the precinct captain, precinct member. What's the actual name again, Kerri?
It's a precinct committeeman.
Thank you.
Okay.
So you have this official title. Now, this is protected by the state, but the thing is that if your state party chair is also, say, what position does your state party chair also hold?
Our state party chair is also the speaker of the House. So he's got dual roles.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, yeah. So he holds
That's a problem.
Right. And the thing is that it takes how many committeemen vote on the state party chair race itself?
Well, so there are different rankings for chair. So there's the state committee chair. And then in my husband's position he was one of the county level district chairs. So in this is where it gets confusing. We have a county chair, and that county chair has 6 different areas, and each one of those district chairs, my husband was one. So he was out there actively while I was campaigning. He was recruiting election judges, precinct committee people, and things like that. So to his credit, he had recruited 6 Democratic candidates, 9 election judges, and 21 precinct committee people in a very red district. So, of course, our party chair would want him gone. So this is what happened, and they admit that it was all in retaliation.
Yeah, so I'm going to interrupt you real fast, just so everybody follows along. So basically, what we're being told here, and something that I was aware of, was that Illinois is basically used as a testing ground because the state party chair controls both the state house, which controls all law written in the state, and the party itself. So they decide who gets endorsements, all kinds of things. So at this point, they control both the rules and the enforcement.
Yeah.
Right?
That's exactly right.
So they have the ability to take any crazy idea, any corruption, and test the implementation, that how far they can take it before you have a federal case. But the thing is we've already tested, and this is where I think the lawsuit against the DNC kind of let us down in a weird sort of way. They set up some bad precedent for us moving forward, because they cleared the precedent that you cannot sue a party in federal or legal court, really, because there's not the forum for it, which makes sense just real fast, because that way the dominant party cannot legislate out the minority party, which is an important part of the process.
Well, I want to be clear, because that has been used as a point to slander us, and me in particular. We never brought a lawsuit against the party. You got to remember that we were still precinct committee people and members of our party. We brought a lawsuit against the specific individuals who had what we believe was criminal wrongdoing. And we were able to show where they violated state law, as well as party bylaws, to harass, coerce, and intimidate us and our small business. So they were doing this, we believe, because we were devoting time to a very popular progressive who was running for Congress. And the DCCC had their own darling that they wanted in that race. So when you go through and look at, and our website's still up with all of our documentation, it's heroic.rocks, ROCKS. But when you look at what they did to us, we saw very clearly that this was a strategic thing. So we wanted to go after the guilty parties, because even at that time, we were still all about, the blue wave. So, yeah.
The naivete of the vote blue no matter.
Yeah.
We've all been there.
Vote blue and matters too is my official stance. Just to jump in real fast, this lawsuit was able to get brought up because the PCO position, or the precinct committeeman position, because they've changed it to officer in some states to be gender neutral, is protected by the state law. So because that position is protected by state law, it's technically an elected position. So you can take that to the Supreme Court. When I mentioned a lawsuit making bad precedent, I was not speaking about your lawsuit. I was speaking about the lawsuit down in Florida.
Yeah, I understood.
Yeah.
But you should clarify that for our listeners.
Yeah, just so everyone knows, the DNC was sued over fraud and
by 2 crazy people, let's be honest.
Well, I am going to make no judgment either way. I've known her for a long time, actually, since 2015 when the move first started.
She should stay off Twitter then.
Yeah, probably. But I don't want to, I in some ways their work was really good, and then it went off an edge, and it's caused some dangerous precedent in regards to suing the party. But that's only in regards to taking on the national party where there's no forum. The state rules that are protected by state law, you can take places. Now, the problem is that when your state party chair is also Speaker of the House, you have to take it to the Supreme Court. Is that correct, Kerri?
That is correct. And the basis of our case was not just, by the time we were actually getting to court, now they delayed it quite a bit, but by the time we were actually getting to court, the DCCC formally came out with their policy. So our case was based on one simple question. If political parties are private organizations, yet they operate based on public funds. So if you think about it, the election process by which they operate is public money. We finance the clerk's office, the ballot access, all of the elections. If that is true, then are they not subject to the same ethics and oversight as any other entity within the state? Right now, it should be.
They have to hold to
Yeah.
their own paperwork and documentation. It's not like they're held to a third idea of the government. It's a matter of being held to your own
I
documentation.
don't even think that's it. I think it's just a matter of being ethical.
Well, the
There's
thing
clear
is-
corruption going on.
That's true, but we have the documentation to remain ethical inside of our bylaws and all that sort of stuff. So
Well.
I think the ethical nature of an organization, and this is where the lawsuit should have gone, and it kind of tried to, but it was, again, the wrong forum, is that it should follow their own bylaws or at least be accountable to them. However, there's a bit of a problem, and that's taking things to the Supreme Court. That's an easy file, right? You can just file
I
some
agree,
sort
but I
of
think
waiver.
there's a bigger. These rules and bylaws are so loosely worded.
Oh,
that
yeah. No, that's true. Some of them are a mess.
absolutely a mess. I've sat through so many DNC member meetings where I've seen them bat the ball around the table for 2 hours and really not be able to make a decision about something that should be absolutely conclusive.
So I went through on that note, and we're going to get back to you in 1 second, Kerri, about the Supreme Court. I tell people that I negotiated part of the superdelegate reform. That sounds super abstract. People don't really understand what that means. And Kerri's here. She witnessed what was going on, where people were reacting to the comments I was making, and the document was getting forged around the points that were being made. And ultimately, you find the DNC making rules not about what to do, but what cannot happen. So
I agree with you there.
So they outline everything in reverse, because you gotta remember, a lot of these people are lawyers, or it's written by some lawyer lobbyist, and then
They're all lobbyists.
you have
for
to
the most part.
unwind. So with the superdelegate rule, for example, what they tried to do, and everyone's afraid, oh, where is the rule going to screw us? Well, I fixed this. You're welcome. And where they were going to try was they had moved the eligibility into a footnote. So by saying the way the rule they had at the top, it allowed superdelegates to be back in the first vote if they simply made that footnote disappear in a printing mistake or at the next convention. It's easy to wipe a footnote. It's hard to change a rule. So getting that folded into the rule is kind of like the things we have to do to stay involved and really change things. And that's why we can have effective policy that can help us, but not if we don't understand this backwards that they work with. And it's pretty insane. It really takes a lot to unwind. I think this is where Kerri was dealing with me saying, this dude sounds crazy. And then 20 minutes later, they're like, oh, no, there it is. So Kerri, getting back to the point though, Supreme Court, that's an easy file, right? You can dial like a fee waiver and get it reduced because you don't have a lot of money, right?
Yeah, no.
Sure, in theory, so, because even state law says, it's very clear. It says an appointed PC shall serve as if elected. That seems very clear, which means you cannot remove someone on a whim, which is what happened to myself and 20 other people. The problem is it's Illinois. So it took us a long time to find an attorney who would even take the case. And most of them were like, look, this is just, we tried a cease and desist, a polite cease and desist after multiple times of trying to get these people to stop harassing us. And the attorneys that helped us write the letter said, look, we don't want to put our name on it. So this is what we're dealing with in our state. So when we finally found an attorney who was willing to take the case, first off, it's not free. Everyone has this idea that, well, you just take them to court. Well, sure, if you've got $60,000 laying around, sure you can. Again, that was our only source of income, and I'm disabled. So I think Trump got it right when he told people that it's outrageous when you can hire a disabled person for $3 and something an hour. That is a true statement. So now we're looking at taking on not just these people who have wronged us, but my state's attorney and all of these other people who said, yeah, we'd like to, but nah, we don't want to touch it. So that's where we are.
The lawyer thing is really important to talk about because we saw the same thing. I was working with Election Justice USA in 2016. I interviewed them as part of that whole interviews were starting to release the documentary anyways. And they had said that when they were trying to deal with election law in New York, that they called every single election lawyer in the state, and every single one was already paid out. And apparently, this was the extent that the Clinton campaign had gone to, because finally the last lawyer, like one of the last 5, whatever, there's a lot of them in New York, took her aside and was like, you know what's happening, right? You know why there's a conflict of interest. Because they bought out, they put every election lawyer in New York on retainer. So they put them all on retainer, and it made it impossible. So they became election lawyers. They weren't election lawyers and got started. And that's how Election Justice USA really started originally.
Well, I think, and to get to Kerri's point, it's very expensive to file a lawsuit. These things are not free, and you would absolutely need around $50K to make that happen.
Oh, yeah. No, I was trying to help her fundraise
You have to pay the jurors, you have to pay the court fees. I mean, that's even if you have an attorney that's willing to work for you for free.
Yeah. To bring up the point about lawyers, this is what we work with candidates now, and we tell them, like, we have ballot challenges here, and that is the easiest way to knock a progressive off. So whenever we work with candidates, we always tell them either you find an election judge now and you put them on retainer, or you're going to have to get affidavits on your own. So, for example, I was running a campaign for a gentleman who ran for Congress, and they threw everything at us. And we had gone into Chicago and talked to election lawyers, and they were very open. They said, look, if Madigan, who is our party chair and speaker, they said, if I get a call from Madigan that says to stay out of the race, I'm not going to be able to help you. And I said, okay, fair enough. How will I know? And he said, well, when you call me, I'm not going to call you back. Fine. Okay. When the time came and we're making phone calls, they're not returning phone calls and we're getting the retainers back. So what we ended up doing, because we were thinking ahead, by this point, we knew what we were up against. So our candidate had to get 2.5 times the signatures required. And he himself collected 90% of them. And any signature that I couldn't read on his petitions, I crossed it out. So when we turned in petitions, we dumped all of them in there. So any challenge that they tried to mount would not knock him off the ballot.
So I literally just went through this, Kerri, because I'm running for the Central Committee here in Los Angeles.
Oh, me too. High five.
So, but we were warned. I'd been warned by folks that I've interviewed. They're now my friends that have run for office, that I needed to get twice as many signatures as what they required. And sure enough, they knocked out 50% of the signatures I got. And I only made the ballot by one signature.
There's a couple tricks.
Yeah.
Which is absolutely insane if you ask me.
In LA County, you can't do this everywhere. There is a trick. So for our election, you only had to get 20 signatures that were valid. You could turn in a maximum of 40. So the trick is you don't turn in 40 at once. You turn in like 28.
Oh, just because they'll be less likely to toss.
They'll invalidate you on the 28, but the person who validates the next wave doesn't know. He's only validating, 10 signatures. He doesn't know if you're going to validate. So they'll just go through and validate everything automatically.
Interesting.
So that's the trick, by the way, is splitting them.
Well, that doesn't work in Illinois because you have to bind them and number all your pages. So they know that.
And this is a method that they use to control elections. And this is where it gets into should we take over the party? Should we run for office? Exactly. The people who make these decisions, they can just continue to make more messed up and oppressive decisions. And Illinois is the example of what happens when you just kind of let the mouse run away with the meal. I mean, it really has gotten out of control.
Yeah. But this is why we need to have a dementor on the lower levels of the party system, because
everywhere.
This is where the rules really start to get formed. And if we don't have people in those positions, every time somebody puts, various things through it that get voted on, you've only got a bunch of corporatist Dems rubber stamping what they want, and they're not listening to the progressives, and nobody's in that room fighting the case.
So when I was filing my petitions, I ended up getting in an argument with a Republican. And that Republican was talking about how they were running for their central committee because they believed that rent control was wrong. They thought, and this woman actually said this, that if I find out my tenant gets more money, I should be able to charge them more money. Yeah, it's totally
That's
insane.
just grotesque, actually. Wow.
Yeah, she actually said this to me. And
wait, what is her name so we know who to not vote for?
It gets... Well, she's on the Republican side, so you can't vote for her.
I can't vote for her anyway.
But I got something for you though. It gets a little hairy. So I hear a voice from behind me. An older gentleman says, "I agree with her. I'm here to fight rent control too." And I go, "Wow, there are a lot of Republicans here today." And he goes,
"I'm a Democrat.
I'm a Democrat." And he was a Democrat. He had served as a veteran. and he felt like it was his right as somebody who served his country to live the American dream. Both these people, and I don't want this to sound anyway, but they both immigrated here, and I don't mean that in any negative connotation. I just found that it's something that there's a shared characteristic. They were here, and this was their idea of the American dream.
But they're not living the American dream. What's so ridiculous to me about that is the plutonymy. They're never going to be a part of that group. It's a small club and you're not in it.
Well, that's the American dream. That's what they're selling people to bring
they are.
Their
so
money
why
here.
do people keep believing that there's equality of opportunity in the country when there actually isn't?
Hang on one second. What city do we live in right here?
Los Angeles.
Okay, and how many times do you hear people say, I'm really looking forward to taking my vacation in Los Angeles?
Never.
Oh, okay. Well, I hear it all the time. Well, I hear it a lot.
Do you really?
Yeah, I do. I hear it a lot. Well, I speak to probably just like random people a lot.
Okay.
And so, yeah, it's a thing. I go around the country. You can drive around the country and you always hear from people saying, oh, you live in LA. I've always wanted to visit there. And I'm like, don't.
Yeah.
Do you love television and movies? And they're like, yes. And I'm like, still not the place to go.
No.
Go to University of Florida.
It's funny because my cousins were here visiting from Malmo, Sweden a few years back, and they wanted to go see Hollywood and Vine.
Right.
And I'm like looking at them, like, there's nothing there. It's a horrible street corner that's just not even attractive.
Yeah, but the Jimmy Kimmel Show. And
I know. It's kind of hilarious. So I took them there, and they were in the car, and they're like, why are you stopping? I'm like, well, we're here.
You do get that sense of regret when you take someone there that wants to get... My point is, I'm off subject. The point is that it's a trap. It's a tourist trap. And we sell this thing to people that have money outside the country or people to build it up that they can be a part of this 1% class. And they're much closer to being homeless than they are to being a billionaire.
Yes, that's my point, and I don't understand why this sort of fable continues to propagate. You had over 80% of the new wealth that was created last year went to the 1%.
Yeah, well,
it's untenable.
They call it a dream for a reason.
Yeah.
But if I can interject.
Of course.
Tina, you bring up a beautiful point, and this is, I think, applicable to political parties. So while we're talking about Dem Inter, and yes, I agree with that. However, it still comes down to human nature. So one example I want to bring up is this situation where it actually happened in my living room. All of these PCs that my husband had helped recruit, and he was there training them, and we had a congressional candidate there and all of these people, and it came down that was the day that they were illegally trying to remove him. And he came out of the conference call to the room to explain this to everyone. And as I looked around the room, each and every one of these PCs looked down, shook their head, and said, I don't want to get involved. I don't know what's going on. I don't want to get involved. So it comes down to personal character and that test. So if we say we're going to do this Dem Inter, who's going to watch us? Are we watching each other? Because Illinois did not get like this overnight. So we're even seeing our own progressive groups where just a little bit of corruption, or we're just going to look the other way this time, or we're not going to bother about, that person may have been banned for life, but I kind of like them, so we're going to let them in, or I'm going to trade this seat to you if you vote my way. We're seeing that even in our own progressive groups. So to the point that Don was making with these individuals who believed something based on a myth or a misnomer, all of that comes down to the human condition and character. And those moments where we are tested, we have no time to prepare for it. It's there. It's right there. So what do you do with that? I think it speaks to the bigger issue that we have, not with political parties, organizations, and laws, and how we treat each other. So I think it ties together.
That's so true. And that's part of being a movement, right? The whole point of being a movement is you're there to step up in these situations. And it's really true also that you never know when the moment's going to come where you're going to be tested, and that test is going to be the determination of your candidacy moving forward or not. Also, want to point out, and feel free to jump in on this at any point, Tina, you were actually successful at removing one person who elects the state party chair, one state committee member. Correct?
Yeah, we did. We had 17 progressives run for state central committee, and one of them, the one who spent the least amount of money, he actually won. And it was a small miracle. So he's now going about trying to forward progressive ideals and things like that at a state party level, as well as help candidates. So it can happen, and I think that that is a case where you can achieve something and that person can then help others too. But then in the same token, we all have to watch each other, because just because
I actually have something about Peter. I spent some time with Peter last.
Who's Peter?
The state committee member who won in Illinois.
That Kerri's referring to.
Yes. I spent some time with him. We went on the train, went to an event, spent the whole afternoon, and to talk about, the success he was having and the troubles he was having. And one interesting thing that came up, because he was the only person but won. Now, you would think, and first off, I want to say he really won because he had a radio show and he was on the radio and people knew who he was. It gave him great reach. And I think that has a lot to do and to say about candidate recruitment and recruiting candidates that already have these assets. But we'll get into that another time. That's a conversation we can have at any moment. Peter was really talking about how people had shunned him. You would expect to be treated like, he won. He was a winner. But that's not how people in the state treated him. They assumed he won because he was the new replacement to walk in line with the state party chair. And there was quite a bit that's going on. I heard his pain. And is there anything, Kerri, you think you'd like to add to that?
No, and that was, I think, just to reiterate that point, you had all of these progressive groups, including our revolution, these leaders, not necessarily the members, but everybody kind of created like these fiefdoms. And rather than celebrating that victory, they were doing the exact same kind of whisper campaign that
they should be ashamed of themselves. So here's my thought on your point, and I don't think you're wrong about human nature. Of course, that's my philosopher in me. I've written extensively in this area. But this is why I believe very strongly in having a dementor where we create rules and bylaws that actually fundamentally deal with that aspect of human nature. Because there's absolutely no way in hell you could ever rely on character, period, end of story. It's just that simple.
So some prioritization within the movement about how we
create rules and bylaws within the party platform itself.
Oh, yeah,
and in the state laws. There's a reason why I have a problem with, for a great example of this is automatic endorsements. They shouldn't happen. And this is partially the reason why. It's ripe for the kinds of things you're talking about. And I think the second area that is the most important area is really getting money out of politics, period, end of story. And if we don't get money out of politics, we cannot deal with corruption. It's just that simple.
Yeah, money in politics is a
money
tricky
in
concept.
politics is the root of all evil.
It really is the root of a lot of things going on that are losing life. I think it's a cost of life really issue.
Yeah. So when I call Bernie Sanders a philosopher king, these are the reasons why. So I'm going to digress to Plato for a second here, because one of the things in the Republic that sticks with us all these centuries later is this concept that folks seek power because they want prestige, they want money for self-serving reasons, right? And those kinds of folks make the worst rulers. The people that make the better rulers are the opposite.
Right.
They're not interested in the money. They're not interested in the power and the prestige.
Just doing the right thing.
Correct. But those are the exceptions to the rule. But this is why Bernie Sanders is a philosopher king, because he has shown us with his character that he's not that corrupt, money-grubbing, power-seeking individual.
So here's a question for you.
Do you see what I'm saying?
Oh, absolutely. I totally agree.
He's a once-in-a-lifetime candidate, and I really sincerely mean that.
That's true, but a lot of that has to do with the time one is spent to achieve that space, right? So follow me on this. Bernie Sanders was able to excel because of a super personable guy, first off. Very lovable, very intelligent, knows his subject.
He's very authentic.
Exactly.
I don't think he tries to be those things. I think he's
he just
him.
is. Absolutely.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, but it works because in campaigning, right, that's what I always try to tell a candidate. You're trying to make a personal connection. You make that personal connection. Yeah. That's why everyone's in Iowa. This is why Elizabeth Warren's campaign is going to be hurt a lot, which we're going to talk about that in a second, jump subjects. But Elizabeth Warren's campaign is going to be hurt a lot by the impeachment hearings, while Bernie isn't. She relies on that one-on-one personal representation. She needs to shake that person's hands to become their voter, while Bernie has surrogates out there doing this. So this stuff is really, really, really important. And
you mean because they're sequestered into the impeachment?
Yeah, they have to be there. She can't, exactly.
Yeah. I think that was a tactical move on Nancy Pelosi.
Yeah, and I don't think anyone expected Bernie to be in the position he was when they set those balls into motion.
Yeah.
Like with this many surrogates and this many endorsements. I mean, it's just, anyways. So this comes back around to, how do you think that now in this modern era, because he was able to, keep in mind, he was elected in 99, right? We were talking about 30 years ago.
In Vermont?
Yeah, no, when he got elected to Congress the first time, right?
okay.
It's just 30 years ago.
Yeah, because in the 80s he was mayor.
Yeah, right, exactly. So he's 29 years and 2 months, I think Yang said when he finally chimed in. we need our math, Yang. Tell us how long it was.
That's about right.
And so, would he be able to do that now with how social media is? Would he be able to build that up, like our candidates that are trying to do that now?
Yeah.
By being that personable, by being that engaged, by being that thing.
Because I don't think it's a fault. I don't think he's trying to be that. He's just
No, I understand
him.
that. Yeah, but he's written books by now and done all these things. He's been on. I mean, he turned me to a Bernie supporter.
Gold and power, and it's really obvious by the decisions that he makes, the things he says.
Well, that's exactly right.
He gives you an honest answer to the media, whereas when you look at the answers the other politicians give that are running for the president right now, they have contrived, like Mayor Pete's the worst one for this. If you look at his answers throughout the debate, or even when I interviewed him, or when I questioned him in the spin room at KDM, the answers are very much contrived.
Sure.
Like he's rehearsed these answers.
Yeah.
He's not answering off the cuff. They're not authentic.
I was in that room. I remember the answers. I was like, wow, really, guys? That's what we're going with? Skyers was particularly amusing with this whole, we just need more housing to solve homelessness. I'm like, dude, there's more empty houses than there are homeless people. The point of this is I'm trying to make is that with all the selfish things you need to do to excel now, to get through social media, to build yourself up.
But I don't think you have to be selfish to do that. I think the opposite is true. So I'm going to be the contrarian here. Your viewpoint that human beings are
I'm not asking a viewpoint. I'm asking you, do you think he could? And you're just taking the stance that they think he can.
I think because most people will argue that agents are selfish. They're selfish agents, right? Like human beings are. I'm going to argue the opposite. I think most human beings are actually pretty altruistic. Because at the end of the day, you realize you gain more by giving to others. It's kinship. None of us can survive on our own. Anyone that thinks they can is sorely mistaken.
No, it's like the single serving from Fight Club that it's so important to remind everyone. Is that hey, Kerri,
do you understand what I'm saying?
I do. I know what you're saying, and I don't feel like I have a stance either way. I mean, I could speak to my own experience about the problems that I've had trying to be whatever I was trying or am trying to be.
No, that's fair. I'm a moral naturalist. If anybody is interested,
well, that's why we're
in
friends
the philosophy
through all the
that
drama. That's why people are like, "Why is she doing that with him?" And I'm sure you got at least like one phone call.
Yeah.
You did?
Of course.
Oh, yeah. Still in the game. What are you doing with that guy? Don't you know? And they're like, no, what? And they're like, I don't know, but I heard things. And you're just like, that sounds about right. So, Kerri, what are your thoughts?
What are your thoughts on... I mean, I hear what you're saying about human nature, and I don't think you're wrong about character, which is why we need to sort of put those things in place. But I also don't believe that human beings are innately selfish. I think there's a point where we all realize we rely on each other if we want to survive as a species.
But we can feel like that's a wounded. Like I like to use the peck to chicken metaphor because there's
definitely a hierarchy. Don't get me wrong. I don't think these things are mutually exclusive. Let's put it that way.
I think, and I was thinking about this today, and this is a total shower thoughts for me. I was like, you know why I've had so much problems in California? Because they don't have a real decent Republican counter to go up against, have to fight.
We do. They're just all Democrats.
Yeah, that's my point, though. But they have so much money that most grassroots players can't do anything. They can't attack them at all.
I agree.
And so they end up just attacking whatever makes them feel different or challenged. And that's just a thing. I think it has a lot to do with who we attract in LA. Like LA attracts a specific type of person.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, Kerri, it's actually your turn. We actually do want to hear your thoughts on that.
Okay. Well, I will say that I used to think like Tina did, but I'm more of a cynic, and I will refer people to...
I wonder what made you that way.
Well, I will refer people to Ambrose Bierce in the Devil's Dictionary. Look up cynic, and that'll give you a pretty good description. So it is my experience that someone like Bernie is a once in a lifetime. So the candidate that I volunteered for, and obviously ended up sacrificing my business and everything for, Jim Walz here in Illinois, he was another one where he really had a good heart. And if you think what happened to us and my business, my company was bad, it's nothing compared to what these people did to him.
Can good guys excel in a bad world?
Right.
How bad it's become.
Well, okay, let me clarify something. Let me clarify something because I'm realizing I wasn't clear on the point I'm making. So when I say I'm a moral naturalist and that people are ultimately, I'm talking about moral choices, not every choice somebody makes.
Oh, right.
So,
Like when you build a strategy to achieve this thing and it may not be morally neutral as your normal decisions, you are making a decision to gain something or achieve something. And then in that process, this is where the Warren...
I don't think these things are mutually exclusive. The people that are non-philosopher kings are definitely chasing power and gold.
Right. And this comes down to what we're dealing with the Warren campaign and what's happening. So I feel like I cut Kerri off. Did I cut you off, Kerri?
Yeah, I did too.
Oh, no, you did it this time. Oh, thank God it wasn't me.
Well, it's a popular topic, but when I consult with candidates and help them work on gearing up to run for office, one of the talks that we have to have is that hard conversation about, in every field, it doesn't matter whether it's insurance or marketing or firefighting or nursing, each one of these attracts certain personalities.
Oh, I think that's definitely true.
Yeah, the nursing attracts angels of death. It's true, though. I mean, my wife watches that stuff like all day long. I'm like, oh my God, just change it.
Well, I mean, like, what, 3% of the population has some form of psychopathy? I think that's just sort of...
Yeah, well, politics draws a particular type of narcissism and lying narcissism, like hiding it all. That's why you got to assume, which I'm kind of writing about in my next article, my part 2 of the prologue of how to create change when you're not elected, when you're hired. And I discussed a little bit about how getting elected really changes a person. Because once they become a candidate, they pretty much, it becomes about power and everything changes. No, it doesn't. The knock every door strategy didn't actually start with Ocasio, this non-voter strategy we're seeing. Didn't actually start with Ocasio. It actually started with this state house rep in Oklahoma that I did strategy for first, named Jacob Rosecrans. And he was in a hard red district, and it was all about getting out there and making that like personal connection. But after he was elected, even because of the grassroots and Bernie delegates and all this stuff, he got in a tiff with one of his grassroots leaders over who was doing what, and it was this grassroots starting to fall apart, and I had to have a talk with him and be like, Jacob, sorry to put you on blast, bro, if you're hearing this, by the way. I had to be like, Jacob, you gotta respect the grassroots, you gotta keep this in check. Now, he's a state house rep. Imagine if you're going to Washington every day. Imagine the effect of all the reporters talking to you. Imagine every word and thing you saying being diced up into news. I mean, that goes to your head, man. So even in the best circumstance, I've seen it with the best of us.
I don't think it necessarily has.
No, it doesn't.
But yeah, those particular personalities. So what we tell candidates is, first off, and this is where the cynicism comes in, you have no friends here. If you're looking to make friends and people that is more than just networking and working together, if you think that you can trust somebody, please do not run. And part of that is because there is no other field that you can enter, that you can rise to power and prestige faster than in politics. So this is why it attracts some of those negative. So this is why it's critical to understand, what are you running for? And if you don't have something that is motivating you outside of yourself and your ego, for example, I'm working with a candidate now who is running because there's an environmental issue where children are literally dying. They are wasting away and dying. And she's running because of that. And so we'll work with her. But if she was running because she had aspirations for something else or bigger or whatever, that makes me nervous.
I think, what Kerri's getting at is exactly right, I think. Politics attracts a higher percentage, like you were saying, of narcissists than in a lot of other fields do, because these are people that are innately looking to seek power.
Right.
So because of that, we're going back around to why it's so important to have ethical rules in place within the party system.
Well, and not to just go back to my articles, but I had talked about the ethical nature. Though something may not be illegal, like a group fundraising with 2 different asks and then funneling that back to one group, though technically not illegal, it is certainly unethical.
Yeah, I think there are lots of things that are unethical that are perfectly legal.
And so, but if we want to be progressives, changing things, we have to be aware that we're not just trying to follow the rules, we're trying to be ethical.
To change the rules.
Exactly, we're trying to be ethical.
So Kerri, do you think that it's fundamentally possible to put in place those types of rules that would fix these issues? Or how much of a cynic are you?
I do. I think part of it is being able to put those rules in place and watching each other. So I don't believe that any role should be an evergreen role, right? So if you're serving in a chairman's role for a couple cycles, you should be working on the bench behind you, and you step down and move over. And so that's where I think in our organizations, when we have that kind of rotation, we protect the organization from the prestige and personality.
So you're talking like term limits for inter-party election roles.
Yeah, I do. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because I've quite doubts about, I go back and forth with senators and whether or not they should or shouldn't because of how intelligence works and all that sort of stuff. It's a little complicated.
Let me play devil's advocate
Sure.
on that. Sometimes, when we instated the term limits in California, it caused another set of problems. If the term limits are so short that they're 2 years, 4 years, you literally have folks that are constantly campaigning for office as opposed to
your
doing
lobbyists
their jobs.
end up in control.
It's a problem. I really believe the only way to fix any of it is to get money out. Honestly.
Yeah, and that's...
Well, the flip side of that is, let's go back to Peter. He was our first progressive SEC member. And when it came time to vote for Madigan, he was a no vote, the no vote that he campaigned on. Well, this poor guy had to have a police escort into the Capitol building, right? So our own Democratic Party whooped up unions and all of these others to protest Peter.
Oh, I'm
over
sure.
one no vote.
Look, this is
one no vote.
Emmanuel Rahm.
Well,
I'm sorry.
We basically, it's like that moment at the end of 300 where he throws a sphere, which is totally traumatized, did not actually happen, which is a shame because a lot of really great stuff actually happened. Anyways, point is, it was like showing that they can bleed. It was like striking it to show you can wound the animal. It's not invincible. And I've heard from Peter the meetings he had, the power, the opportunities he got from the Madigan being like, we will literally give you anything you want. Because he has a perfect record. He's never had anyone vote against him ever. So this was like the first time. And this was what the culmination was. One no vote against him, which may seem not like much.
No, it's a guy taking up a stance, and good for him.
Good for him, yeah. And he deserves more support. And Illinois is a mess because, and this brings into corruption, why corruption is so important. Because some people will say, oh, well, this doesn't affect me, or I turn the blind eye. But we see these policies enacted in other states. We see them try to do it. We fight them there. If we took the fight here, we wouldn't have to fight them in other states. So, Kerri, I want to thank you so much for telling us your story. I don't know if there's anything else that really needs to come in, but, Peter, I really feel like, deserves a little bit of a better swing with some people there. He really did the work, and he could have taken anything, and he said no, as we should in these situations. Also, when corruption is this bad, it sets a standard of corruption for all groups. So we see OR members and progressive leaders pulling some of these same slanderous, slinkish, dark sort of maneuvers because the standard has been set that this is socially acceptable. And it's not, and it causes a lot of damage. So there's a little bit of a kerfuffle over the delegates right now in Illinois and whether or not they're going to have enough people on the ballot and alternates. So it's really important that people get involved and not listen, because the oppression that we see from the corporate end of the party, that's running downhill. And that's ending up, the progressives are doing it to each other too. And this is something we see in LA a lot. Because, I've been thinking about this a lot I took a lot of heat. I was the only statewide leader besides the campaign last time around, 2016. So, and I was operating with all those people. I never really considered how much heat I would take because the campaign wasn't here to take any of that when they left. Kind of just dawned on me the other day. Anyways, moving on. Kerri, thank you so much for being here. I just want to say a couple things before we get out of here. We're going to change subjects. Last time we did this, we talked about potential of World War III breaking out. And I want to get into this real quickly because I think that it's impossible to have this in our first podcast and not bring it up in this one. And that is that, fortunately, unfortunately, it appears we have avoided World War III, but for very, very unfortunate reasons. And I think this brings more talk about why we need an anti-war movement. Wouldn't you agree, Tina?
Explain your theory first.
Comment. Sure. That's probably always a fair idea. Yeah. So basically the Ukrainian plane full of all kinds of innocent bystanders, many from Canada, was shot down by an Iranian missile. They actually have a video released where they shot 2 separate missiles after it. This was after the Iranians had bombed one of our sites where Trump claimed nobody was injured. It turned out 11 people were airlifted from the site with various injuries from it. And this was all because Trump had basically assassinated one of their generals, who essentially is like a secretary of defense, who was really crucial. Like ISIS was like, holy shit, thank God this guy's dead. We can do all kinds of stuff. I believe that's a direct
he
quote.
was on his way to negotiate a peace deal with Saudi Arabia.
Yeah,
what Trump did is absolutely unacceptable.
Word is that Trump actually drew him out of wherever he was to receive this from him for negotiations, and then they shot him down with an unmanned drone on his way out. So it's like tracking him where he is and then killing him. Now this guy sent mean memes apparently on Instagram, and apparently this is our first official person who's been shot by an unmanned drone over mean memes on Instagram. Even on Twitter.
I doubt that's true. Do you know how many people we have shot down with drones?
That's probably true. We probably have done it before. Anyways, this is a very public thing that they knew. I shouldn't laugh, but that's hilariously terrible.
We act like terrorists over there. So I really think Americans need to get past this idea that they're the terrorists and we're the freedom fighters, because it's not entirely true.
My official stance is I'm against unmanned drone attacks in general.
100%.
It's been going on for most of these people's lives, and it's horrible. Anyways, moving on.
I mean, what kind of blowback do Americans expect when this is what they do? Yeah. You think that there's going to be no blowback from this?
That's imperialism. That's how imperialism works.
All of this is done in the name of empire.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're not even sure what that empire is anymore. Oil. It's the corporate empire.
It's corporate oil, and it's oil.
So,
I mean, you have to go back to like we talked, I don't know if we talked about in the last podcast, but we have to go back 70 years to when the CIA overturned a democratically elected government in Iran. This is going on a long time. And the reward for the CIA helping the Shah in that was that U.S. companies got 40% of the oil fields.
Right. That's crazy. I mean, we don't get deals.
It sounds like a crazy conspiracy theory, but it's really not.
Well, you know what's even worse than that?
The CIA documents have been released now. So, you can read them, folks. If you're unfamiliar with this history, I really recommend you look at these documents and get knowledgeable on this, because what's happening in the Middle East is part and parcel to our run-amok corporate system. None of it's about morality. None of it's about giving people more freedoms. That's the sales pitch.
That's the pitch, right?
None of it's about fighting terrorism or fighting communism or authoritarian regimes. It's all bullshit.
Yeah, we're cutting deals with communism. I don't know what you're talking about. We're just making a new trade deal with them.
We're going to deal with anybody if it furthers our corporate interests.
Right. And that's really what it's all about. We're getting
the guy we assassinated was 2 years ago a hero because he was fighting against ISIS. So which is it?
I know, yeah.
We armed Al-Qaeda.
Yeah, it's like we're there, and
anyway, I
could
go on about this for a whole nother podcast.
We should, actually, because I think discussing war as an issue and a peace movement, because it shouldn't be an anti-war movement, it should be a pro-peace movement. That's really important. Right? So,
like Tulsi Gabbard likes to talk about a peace department, and I think that's really
to negotiate the ceasefires, not the wars. Yeah, exactly. That's good. It's all about we're manifesting what we say. So, well, unfortunately, this Ukraine flight was shot down, and instead of march to war, which Canada could have done, and for some of us, this felt like, I hate using this word because it's such a conspiracy theory, but it felt a little like a false flag. For a moment, many of us were wondering, did we shoot down a Ukrainian plane full of Canadians in order to get Canada on board with a war with Iran, and we're marching to World War III. It's a legitimate thought that people are having about what's going on. And then something unexpected happened. And unlike when we shot down an Iranian flight and never apologized, what happened, Tina? With Iran, they came in and they admitted to shooting down the plane.
Yeah, well, they didn't at first. I wasn't sure where you were going.
Sure. No, that's fine. That was an awkward setup. But we're working it out here. So, no, they did. They admitted and they apologized. And
it was a mistake. I don't know whether it was or not. I think that's sort of tangential to the point.
The loss of life is incomprehensible.
It is incomprehensible. But I think as a nation, as Americans, as a nation, we need to really examine our foreign policy and what we're doing out there, because...
Well, they're terrified. They shot down a plane because they're afraid we were going to bomb them. They thought that was their missile defense system. They thought the plane was missiles coming in.
Nothing good comes from this. We're enriching the plutonium and nothing more.
Exactly. So
the people of Iran don't want this. The people of the United States, I think, for the most part, don't want
this. There's a whole protest movement asking the leader to step down, which people, you don't usually see that in Iran. So I just wanted to tell everybody, we do appear to be marching away from World War III, and I think it's a worldwide effort of people going, this can't happen.
I think people are pretty fed up, and they're starting to finally see this stuff for what it is.
Right, which makes for an amazing segue So there's also been another ceasefire that has been very interesting, and that's been between progressives after the tough-up between Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders.
There's a ceasefire?
Yeah, among progressive groups, 18 or something.
I think you're mistaken.
Well, no. I meant between the two candidates. The supporters are
I
the
think
different...
you're mistaken on that as well.
Then please inform me what has happened.
Yeah, I saw that letter that was put out, but it's a bunch of hogwash.
Well, they're calling for it. It's not Elizabeth Warren's team isn't going, but we're seeing a lot of stuff come from Biden actually right now.
They're both playing dirty at this point. Elizabeth Warren has dirt all over her grubby hands, and so does Joe Biden. I mean, just today we had Chris Warren, who is with the Biden campaign. He put out a statement on Twitter where he said that Bernie said, quote unquote, Buttigieg is young, Buttigieg is gay, so ergo something to the fact that he's not electable. But this isn't what Bernie said. If you look at the actual statement, what Bernie said was he's a young guy. I mean, how do you conflate he's a young guy into Buttigieg is young, Buttigieg is gay, he can't win an election?
Maybe he thinks there's only one. Maybe he thinks there's only one vowel.
Yeah, this is egregious bullshit, is what it is.
It is. It's unbelievable.
So I don't actually, and I'm going to be the strong arm of this. I don't want a ceasefire with the Warren campaign. Mm-hmm. I don't want a ceasefire with the Biden campaign. I'm done with all of this because they've colluded with the media in more ways than one for years now.
Right.
To smear Bernie Sanders with this bullshit. Bernie is not a sexist.
No.
And, she's got this laundry list of things that she's exaggerated about, lied about, starting with being a Native American. On her first job at the University of Texas, she checked the box as I'm white. Then all of a sudden we go into the 90s, and now because it serves her, she's a person of color, she's a Native American. She did this to further her own career.
So what we're seeing
it's unacceptable.
What we're seeing here that I want to tell everyone about that I think we're going to start seeing this spin, especially with Biden. So a ceasefire was called between 18 progressive groups or whatever the number is, and I have called for it because I believe that Elizabeth Warren is tanking her own campaign, and the progressives aren't going to follow the maneuver they're trying to make. But what
it doesn't make it okay to me.
No, that's true. That's true. We're just going to speak objectively for a second. Not okay, just happening. So what is
hang on, there's nothing though. I know, sorry, but I got to say this. There's absolutely nothing for the Bernie Sanders campaign to gain from having a ceasefire with these guys.
Okay,
You know who gains from this? Biden gains from it. Buttigieg gains from it. Warren gains from it. Sanders does not.
And
thank you for attending my TED Talk.
I mostly agree with you up to a certain point that I'm being very clear on. I think we're seeing a push right now, especially, so let me just draw this out. I'm going to draw a picture for everyone. So the progressives come out and say, we need Warren and Bernie to stop fighting. Now, what this is really about is...
Warren needs Bernie to stop fighting.
Well, no. I don't agree with that. And this is why. Hang on. Let me give you a chance. Give me a chance. So what it comes down to is Warren is pulling this progressive. I went through the New Hampshire poll data, right? New Hampshire and Iowa. They've been putting out a lot of really complex poll data. I went through all of it. Who's willing to change their mind? How liberal, progressive? Because they don't say progressive, they say very liberal, right? On that, and how very liberal they see themselves, or how big the environment is an issue, how big, blah, blah, blah. All these things that Warren is backtracking on. So what we need to do is it's a fine line between making us an inclusive movement that is approachable to Warren supporters as they change their mind. Because, Tina, I'm sorry, 50% of voters polled say they're open to changing their mind about their candidate. And there, it's like somewhere between 40. I think Elizabeth Warren had said only 44%. That's all
fine and good. That doesn't mean that Bernie Sanders shouldn't push back against this bullshit rhetoric. But that's what the Warren campaign is asking for, especially after that.
I don't think the Warren campaign is asking for anything. I'm just saying that this moment calls for some nuance.
I don't think it does.
I think this moment calls for a little nuance.
Look, there were two people in that room: Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren.
No, Elizabeth Warren.
There were no four anonymous sources.
Here, I'm going to do you a favor.
Completely contrived.
I'm going to do you a favor. Elizabeth Warren is making. I'm not going to call her like trash or something hyperbolic, and not going to use any disparaging remarks other than she has lost my faith as a progressive.
Okay, that's fair.
Okay, and so if she's lost my faith, there are other people who are losing that faith too.
Oh, I agree. She's plummeting in the polls, and this is the reason why.
So, but the thing is what happened in that polling data that you may not have noticed is that Bernie didn't jump the amount that Warren dropped. You know who took up her voters?
Well, he did jump a considerable amount, but I also saw a rise in Buttigieg and Biden's polling numbers, which is why...
You know who got her voters?
Which is why they're going to benefit from this bullshit.
No, you ready? I'm going to get you on this.
Wait, you're
Klobuchar.
Klobuchar. Yeah. Okay, so that was a one-off poll. I did see that.
I'm saying Klobuchar absorbed the people. Now,
she didn't absorb all of them, but that's a one-off poll.
She absorbed a lot. No,
but
that's true.
Hang on. These are the still withering folks.
Sure.
They just care whether or not she's got a pussy.
Right. Oh my God. Okay, hang on. The point is, though, is that when you looked into the Klobuchar data, the most important point to like 50% of our people was the environment. So I know it makes no sense.
The fracking queen.
But
follow
follow me on how we build support, how we pull those people to Bernie. They are people that want a female voter, that a female leader, or someone who is a feminist, which a woman is automatically more feminist than any man, even if they're not. I don't agree with that either. But on the surface and identity politics, that's the thing. Because
I agree that that's what the identity politics people think, but it's absolutely not true.
Well, it's just mostly the people.
Have you met Sarah Palin?
No, not. I have not been honored with that. I avoid Alaska is one of the few states I haven't been to. Actually, I think it's the only one. So
Michelle Bachmann. Should I pull out my whole list?
No, I said humans, honey. I said humans.
I know you're saying, but the identity politics people do believe that just because you're a woman,
right?
Which is just a ridiculous argument.
Right. So we're not going to win them on that subject. But what we will overlap them on is the environment. And the environment is the thing that the Amy Klobuchar voters, who are the overlap with Warren, really care about. So we're going to win them over through that means. I'm just trying to give an example.
She was defending fracking which is one of the biggest drivers of climate change. So this makes zero sense.
Yeah, no, I'm not saying it.
I
think that people, like you said, it was a short poll. They made the quick jump. They were coming.
I did see it. I hear what you're saying. I did see it, but I sort of just was like, eh.
Yeah, but I think this, with only 2 weeks until Iowa, this is something that we can use to our advantage to pick up those people as they sing.
I agree. All right, let me say this. I think you can attack a candidate, or in the sense when I'm saying attack, I'm using my scare quotes, because I think you need to address the lies, the fabrications, the manufactured consent that is being engaged in. You can do that and still attract the voters. The point is you don't get into the personal attacks.
Right.
You don't call folks names. You just list out the truth. Like, these are the facts of the matter. And
you're still going to offend them with that. But
yeah, some of those people are going to be offended because they're engaging in some severe antecedent bias. They don't want to believe there's a problem with their candidate. And so, but these are the quote unquote never Bernie folks. Right. We're never going to touch them anyway.
Right.
Let them go still wither in the dark.
Right. And you're on Twitter, so you know.
See what I did there?
Yes, I did. That was good. So she waved her hand into the dark corner, which I'm afraid to go into. What I also want to point out, because we do got to wrap this up, is the lurker, right? The lurker is the low information voter. They're the person that isn't commenting. They don't have time to get in some big argument. They're reading your comment, and they're going to see either you're being kind, understanding, and objective, because you're not going to convince the person you're arguing with. They're creating a forum. They're creating real estate for you to convince other people that are going to see this later.
100%.
And so it's not necessarily about, you're not going to win this person over. That's not a realistic idea. You're instead going to convince all the people who are looking to see.
I agree with you, who are lurking, which is why I do spend time on Twitter doing this, because I think it's important that people see the actual facts of the matter.
Right.
And it's not necessarily because I want to agree with a person I'm either tweeting or engaging with. It's because there are people reading that stuff.
Exactly.
That will benefit from that knowledge.
Exactly.
And they're never going to comment.
Exactly.
But yes, I 100% agree with you on that, Don.
And so this is for the next month.
But that's not really a truce, is it?
Well, yeah, kind of. I mean, yeah, technically, I think that qualifies. That shouldn't need to be a truce. We should be doing that anyways.
But they started this stuff.
That's true, but we're trying to take the White House, so we can't go on this tit for tat sort of thing. We're trying to save lives.
We do have to freaking address the egregious information that they're trying to put out there.
And how we address it is the key.
Says that how could Bernie Sanders ever say this?
Oh, I know.
It's important that we come back and say, no, that's not what he said. This is what he said. You're spreading a lie right now. Please don't do that.
I want to say two things about him saying Buttigieg, which is, I think, how you say it.
Buttigieg. I know I call him Mayor Pete because I always feel bad about
It's much easier. I say everyone else's last name. I go, Mayor Pete.
Yeah, it's a tough one.
So the idea that he would say is gay is ridiculous is a problem, because Bernie has been for LGBTQ rights since it was just the L and the G.
Exactly.
When he was into it, it was Lesbian and Gay Day. Mm-hmm. They didn't even need to abbreviate it yet, because that was as far. When people get mad about Bernie's writing and they go, oh, he talks about this. There's a essay he wrote about a woman and her sexual needs that people get so upset about. And I'm like, we have defined those terms so much better now than we did then. And I think that his banner, that poster, the banner of the Lesbian and Gay Rights Day.
Yeah, no, he's been supporting these things back when he was mayor in Burlington and nobody else was. So,
I'm sure
so
well
to me,
before
calling him homophobic or sexist is just absolutely ridiculous.
So the flip side of that is, now we have the quote. He said guy, not gay. It's just they changed a vowel, which is the laziest slime ever. Of course they did it on purpose. It's the Biden. So we're seeing basically the beginning of the Biden-Warren campaign, which is traditionally in 2016, a lot of people criticized Bernie because he was ultimately forced and tricked into sheepdogging, or at least try to sheepdog his people. And so we're seeing that play out right now with Warren precisely. She is basically getting picked up. She doesn't have the money to compete through Super Tuesday. She's going to go into Biden's campaign. So all that I have to say about this is we're now going to see dirty tricks, even though there's a truce. It's going to come from Biden's side, which is what we're seeing the start of today.
I agree.
So
it's going to get nasty.
Yeah, it's going to step up, and what's going to happen, and we are going to absorb those votes. We're
going to take the hits.
Right. And either the Warren voters go get sheepdogged to Biden because we're too toxic. Biden just has to do nothing. He just has to not take off someone's fingertip at a rally. You know what I mean?
I'm not convinced that that's true. I mean, I think the whole conversation the last couple of days about how he's 4 times wanted to cut Social Security is really important information.
Well, I agree, but if he gets us to be angry, the identity politics will overwhelm those low information.
Wait, he's a white male. Like,
yeah,
this
but people,
this is pure hypocrisy.
He's nostalgia, man. They love the I know.
Anyway.
I know. We have to close it up there, guys. I'm sure we could go on about this again.
Yeah.
We did have a gap in recording last week because she was at an event which had, before we had started this whole thing up. You were at CES for the week. We didn't do a recording. So we're going to do these a little more regularly. Thank you, everybody. Progressive Insider's already grown. Please join us on Facebook. Our Facebook group is our main place right now. It's just Progressive Insider. We're the only one. We also have Instagram, Twitter. We're just getting them rolling out. And if you'd like to become a writer or you have a story you want to tell, please write us on our page and we'll get talking. So, Tina, Kerri, anything you guys want to say before we go?
No. Kerri?
Oh, she's already gone. That was smart.
No, she's there.
I'm sorry. No, I really appreciate the opportunity and the conversation. Thank you.
Oh, Kerri. No,
it was great talking with you, Kerri.
Yeah, and we're going to try our best to do something. But we're going to bring you back on to talk a little more about this Madigan thing in a longer situation. But right now, we're Progressive Insider, and thank you for listening.
Today's broadcast was brought to you by Dawn E. Ford and Tina-Desiree Berg, as well as volunteers working to make a better world for everyone.